Welcome, weary traveler. You've left the noise of the world behind and stepped into a realm untouched by time. Here, candlelight dances upon ancient stone walls, and the air carries the soft hum of forgotten lullabies. Beyond these gates, the night is gentle, and every story is a silver thread, weaving warmth around your heart. So rest your mind. Let each word be a quiet step into the halls of dreams until sleep, tender and deep, finds you. You are safe here, and the world drifts away. Chapter 1: The Quiet Village. In a corner of the world where time moved softly and days seemed to drift like clouds, there was a little village surrounded by green hills and gentle streams. The cottages were built of stone and timber, their thatched roofs golden beneath the sun and silver beneath the moon. Narrow lanes wound between them, lined with wildflowers that leaned lazily toward the light. It was in this village that Jack lived. He was not a slayer of giants, nor a hero from songs, but a boy with kind eyes and a thoughtful smile. His cottage stood at the edge of the fields, where wheat swayed in calm rhythms, and a brook carried the sound of water over smooth stones. Jack tended the land with quiet care, his days filled with the soft rustle of leaves, the warm smell of bread cooling on the hearth, and the low hum of bees drifting through the meadows. Though the village was small, it was full of warmth. The blacksmith, Marin, was known for his deep laugh that carried through the square. Old Alara, who sold herbs and teas, often brewed cups that seemed to chase the chill from even the coldest nights. The children played by the fountain, their laughter mingling with the steady trickle of water. And every evening, lanterns were lit one by one, casting golden circles of light that flickered gently against the stone walls. Jack loved those evenings most. After the work of the day, when the animals had been tended and the tools put away, he would sit by the cottage door with a cup of milk, watching as the sky changed its colors. The horizon glowed in soft shades of rose and gold, fading slowly into indigo. Birds tucked themselves into their nests, and the first stars appeared like quiet candles in the heavens. A breeze often carried the fragrance of the baker's bread cooling on wooden trays, mixed with the faint sweetness of lavender from nearby fields. There was nothing urgent in this village, nothing hurried. Each task was done with care and patience, as though the people knew that time itself was a gentle companion, not something to race against. When the bell in the square chimed, it was not sharp or demanding, but deep and soothing, a reminder that night was coming and rest was near. Jack's heart was often filled with a sense of wonder for these small, quiet things. He would listen to the brook whispering in the dark, or the crackle of his hearth fire, and feel as though the world was speaking in a language softer than words. Sometimes he would take long walks beneath the moon, letting the silver light guide his steps along the winding lanes. The field stretched out like a vast quilt, stitched with hedgerows and touched by dew, and in the distance the hills rose like gentle guardians around the valley. Though he was young, Jack carried an old soul. He did not dream of battles or crowns, but of harmony, of sitting beneath a great tree and hearing the leaves sigh with the wind, of watching lanterns glow in the square while the villagers shared stories, of knowing that each night would close with peace and each morning would open with songbirds greeting the dawn. On one such evening, Jack returned from the fields later than usual. The sun had already sunk, leaving the sky painted with the last blush of twilight. The village lanterns had been lit, their light shimmering against cobblestones worn smooth by many footsteps. As he passed the square, he paused at the fountain. Its water, kissed by moonlight, gleamed like liquid silver. He dipped his hand into it and felt the coolness spread through his fingers. the simple touch reminding him of how alive the quiet could be. Nearby, Alara closed her shutters, humming a tune older than memory. Marin locked his forge, the glow of embers still warm behind him. A child darted past, her laughter trailing like a ribbon of light before she vanished into her family's doorway. The whole village seemed to sigh together, as though settling into a deep and contented rest. Jack continued on, the rhythm of his footsteps slow and unhurried. The path to his cottage curved past an old oak tree, whose branches stretched wide as if to shelter the earth itself. He placed a hand against its bark, rough and steady, and closed his eyes for a moment. The wind moved gently through its leaves, and he felt as though the tree breathed with him, its ancient calm lending strength to his own quiet heart. By the time he reached his door, the stars had gathered thickly above. They seemed brighter in Greendale's skies, as though the heavens themselves leaned close to bless the valley. Inside, his cottage welcomed him with the smell of wood smoke and the gentle glow of the fire he had left burning low. He set a log upon it, watching the flame catch slowly, the room filling once again with soft amber light. His supper was simple bread, cheese, and honey from a neighbor's hive, but he savored each bite. As he ate, he listened to the night outside, the whisper of the brook, the faint chirp of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. Each sound seemed part of a grand, unhurried symphony, a song that lulled not only him but the whole valley into stillness. When at last he lay upon his bed, he felt the weight of the day slip from him like a cloak. The linen was cool, the blanket soft, carrying the faint fragrance of lavender sprigs tucked within. The fire flickered low, the shadows danced gently across the wooden beams, and through the window, the moonlight streamed in like a guardian's hand, tender and steady. Jack closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling safe, feeling whole. In that moment, the world seemed perfectly at peace. The village rested, the fields dreamed, the brook whispered, and the stars watched. And Jack, with a heart as calm as the valley itself, drifted into sleep as softly as a feather falling upon still water. Chapter 2: The Whispering Beanstalk. Morning came to the village not with noise, but with gentleness. The first light slipped quietly over the hills, brushing the rooftops with gold and warming the fields until the dew sparkled like 1,000 tiny stars. Birds greeted the dawn in calm chorus, their songs weaving with the soft rustle of leaves and the distant sound of water flowing over stones. Jack woke slowly, his eyes opening to the glow of sunlight across the wooden beams of his cottage. The air was cool and clean, carrying the faint sweetness of clover from the meadows. Stretching, he rose from his bed, pulled on his tunic, and opened the door to let the morning in. A breeze wandered through, lifting the edges of his blanket, as though the day itself had stepped across his threshold to greet him. Outside, the fields moved like a living sea. The wheat swayed in steady rhythm, the brook gleamed silver beneath the rising sun, and the sky stretched wide and endless above. Jack breathed deeply, letting the freshness of morning fill his chest, and smiled. Another day had begun in peace. He moved through his simple morning tasks, feeding the hens, carrying water from the brook, gathering herbs that grew near his door. Each task was done slowly, without rush, for in Greendale time had a rhythm all its own. Even the animals moved with quiet patience, the hens clucking softly, the cows lowing gently, their breath warm in the cool air. It was as Jack finished his chores that he noticed something unusual near the far edge of the field. At first, it seemed only a shadow, a trick of the morning light. But as he drew closer, he saw it was something entirely different, something that had not been there before. A stalk of green, taller than any he had ever seen, reached upward as though it wished to touch the sky. Its surface glistened faintly, dew clinging to its curling leaves. It spiraled higher and higher until its top vanished into the mist that still lingered above the valley. Jack stood very still, gazing upward. The stalk was vast, but not frightening. Its presence felt calm, almost welcoming, as though it had grown not in haste, but in harmony with the earth. The leaves whispered gently in the breeze, and the sound was soft, like a lullaby carried on the wind. He reached out and placed his hand upon the stalk. It was cool, smooth beneath his fingers, yet strong, like polished wood. The contact filled him with a curious sense of serenity, as though the beanstalk was alive not only in body but in spirit. Throughout the day, the village gathered near the field. Marin came first, wiping his soot-blackened hands on his apron, his eyes widening at the sight. Alara followed, her basket of herbs forgotten at her side. Children tugged at their mother's skirts, pointing upward with wide eyes. But though the stalk was strange, there was no fear in their faces, only wonder. The stalk stood not as a threat, but as a marvel, a gift that seemed to have emerged from the earth itself. Its roots dug deep into the soil, steady and sure, and its height lifted their gaze toward the heavens. "It is as though the sky has given us a ladder," murmured Alara, her voice low, yet filled with awe. Jack said nothing, but his heart beat with quiet curiosity. He could not help but wonder what lay above the mist, where the stalk vanished into the clouds. Yet the thought did not stir restlessness. Instead, it settled over him like a calm invitation. An adventure, perhaps, but one without urgency. A journey meant not to disturb peace, but to deepen it. That evening, as the lanterns were lit and the village settled into its nightly rhythm, Jack sat by the stalk's base. The moon rose slowly, silver and round, casting a soft glow over its leaves. They shimmered faintly, as though touched by starlight, and their whispering grew gentler still, like words he could almost understand. He leaned back against the stalk, feeling its strength against his shoulders. Above him, the stars filled the sky, countless and clear, yet the stalk seemed to rise higher still, connecting the earth and the heavens in one unbroken thread. The villagers had returned to their cottages. The square was quiet, and only the fountain's trickle joined the song of the night. Jack remained, his breath steady, his eyes half closed, listening to the beanstalk as though it told him stories in the language of leaves. And though he did not yet know where it led, he felt no need to hurry. The stalk would remain. The sky would wait. Tonight was for peace, for stillness, for dreams that drifted upward as slowly as lantern smoke rising into the night. When at last he returned to his cottage, the scent of lavender lingered in the air, carried by the breeze through his window. He lay upon his bed, his thoughts soft and untroubled. Beyond the walls, the stalk whispered on, and Jack felt as though it guarded him, a green sentinel standing watch until morning. He closed his eyes, and the valley folded itself around him, quiet and safe. The brook murmured, the leaves sighed, and the beanstalk reached ever higher, not with urgency, but with grace. And Jack, resting in the heart of it all, drifted into sleep with the sense that he was part of something vast, gentle, and eternal. Chapter 3: The Castle in the Clouds. The morning after the beanstalk's arrival dawned softly, as all mornings in Greendale seemed to do. Mist curled lazily over the meadows, silver in the early light. The brook hummed with its usual song, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and fresh blossoms. Jack stirred awake to find his window washed in pale gold. He sat up slowly, stretching as the gentle beams of sunlight brushed across his face. Outside, the village was stirring too. Cottage doors opening, smoke rising from chimneys, and the faint sound of Marin already at work in his forge. And there, as though it had always been, the beanstalk stood tall at the edge of the field. Its leaves gleamed in the light, and its spiral trunk reached far beyond the highest clouds. Its presence, though extraordinary, felt strangely natural, as if it belonged to the valley's rhythm as much as the brook and the hills. Jack lingered in his cottage for a while, sipping warm milk and honey. He thought of the beanstalk and the way its leaves had whispered the night before. His curiosity stirred again, not with urgency, but with the steady pull of a gentle tide. Perhaps he thought it was time to see what lay above. By mid-morning, he made his way to the base of the stalk. The villagers gathered again, watching quietly as he approached. Their faces carried no fear, only trust and a shared wonder. "You'll climb then?" asked Alara, her voice calm, as though she had known this choice would come. Jack nodded slowly. "Only to see what waits above. I will return." Marin clapped him gently on the shoulder. "Take your time. The stalk seems to have patience enough for all of us." And so Jack began. He placed his hand on the cool, sturdy vine, feeling its strength, and lifted himself onto the first foothold. The stalk seemed to welcome him, each curl and twist forming a natural step. Slowly, carefully, he climbed. The village grew smaller beneath him. The cottages, the square, the fields, all folded into a patchwork quilt of green and gold. The brook wound through it like a ribbon of silver, and the lantern poles in the square shone faintly even in the daylight. Jack's heart was steady, his breath calm. There was no hurry, no strain, only the quiet rhythm of hand and foot, step by step, rising into the sky. Clouds gathered around him. At first they were thin and wispy, brushing against his cheeks like cool silk. Higher still, they thickened into soft banks, pale and glowing. He passed through them as though stepping into a dream, their coolness dampening his hair, their whiteness surrounding him in a gentle hush. And then, at last, he emerged above them. The sky stretched wide and endless, a deeper blue than he had ever seen. The sun shone warmly, its light softened by the clouds below, and before him, rising from the mist like a vision, was the castle. Its towers glistened as though carved from pale stone touched with silver. High walls curved gently, not severe but graceful, their battlements softened by moss and ivy. Windows gleamed faintly in the light, and banners drifted lazily in the breeze. It was a castle not of war, but of peace, standing serenely above the world, as though guarding dreams rather than lands. Jack paused upon the stalk, gazing in quiet wonder. The castle seemed alive with calm, as though its stones had been laid not for conquest but for harmony. He climbed down from the stalk onto the cloud itself, which held him as firmly as earth. His boots sank slightly, as though the cloud were soft grass. The air here was different, lighter, cooler, carrying the faint fragrance of rain mixed with sunlight. Jack walked slowly toward the castle gates. They were tall but not imposing, crafted from pale wood bound with silver bands. As he approached, the gates opened with a sigh, as though they had been waiting for him. Inside, the courtyard spread wide, paved with smooth stone that gleamed in the sunlight. A fountain stood at its center, its water spilling gently into a wide basin. Birds circled overhead, their wings glimmering like shards of pearl. The sound of the fountain joined with the distant rustle of banners, weaving into a melody of peace. Jack walked further, his steps slow, savoring each detail. The halls of the castle opened into wide chambers filled with light. Windows arched high, allowing the sky to pour its blue and gold into the rooms. In one chamber, a long table was set not with banquets, but with bowls of fruit and fresh bread, as though prepared for a guest who had taken their time. In another, soft couches were placed near glowing braziers, their warmth mingling with the coolness of the high air. The castle felt empty, yet not lonely. It carried the stillness of a place where voices were not needed, where the very stones spoke in calm. Jack wandered slowly through its halls, pausing often to gaze at carvings upon the walls. They showed images of harmony, birds perched beside lions, rivers winding peacefully through valleys, stars watching over sleeping villages. Each carving seemed to echo the life he already knew in Greendale, yet lifted into a dreamlike grace. At last, he found a balcony that overlooked the sea of clouds. He stepped onto it, the wind cool against his face, and gazed outward. The clouds stretched endlessly, glowing in the sun, their surface shifting slowly like a calm ocean. Above them, the sky deepened toward evening, stars already beginning to shimmer at the edges. Jack rested his hands upon the balcony rail, his heart steady and light. The journey had brought him here not to test his courage, but to remind him of peace that reached beyond the valley, beyond the hills, even beyond the earth. The castle was not a place of giants or battles. It was a sanctuary, a dream above the world, built for those who climbed with patience and wonder. Jack lingered there until the lights softened to twilight, the sky painted in shades of rose and indigo. Then, when his heart was full, he turned back toward the Beanstalk. The climb downward was as gentle as the climb upward, each step steady, each breath calm. By the time he reached the village once more, lanterns were glowing in the square, their golden light dancing in the dusk. Marin and Alara were waiting near the stalk, their faces calm but expectant. "You've seen what lies above?" Alara asked softly. Jack nodded, his smile peaceful. A castle among the clouds, quiet, beautiful, and waiting. The villagers listened, their eyes wide with wonder, but no one rushed to follow. They knew, as Jack knew, that the castle would remain. There was no need for haste. The sky would always wait. That night, Jack returned to his cottage, his heart lighter than it had ever been. He lay upon his bed, the blanket warm, the pillow cool against his cheek. Outside, the beanstalk whispered in the night breeze, its leaves carrying echoes of the castle above. And Jack, safe in his small cottage, drifted into dreams where clouds and stars and stone halls all blended into one endless song of peace. Chapter 4: The Gentle Giants. Jack awoke the next morning with sunlight brushing across his face like a soft hand. The golden warmth filtered through the leaves of the beanstalk, and for a while he simply lay still, listening. High above, the world felt slower, quieter. Birds sang in softer tones, as though the morning air itself was hushed with reverence. He rose carefully, brushing dew from his tunic, and looked out upon the sea of clouds spread below. The beanstalk swayed gently, like the mast of a ship, and the sky stretched around him in vast blue calm. The sight was so serene, so boundless, that Jack felt as though he were floating between heaven and earth, carried only by the breath of the wind. With patient steps, he climbed higher. Each broad leaf held him steady, each curling vine guiding him upward. The air cooled as he rose, carrying scents of rain and wild blossoms unseen. Sometimes he paused to rest against the sturdy stalk, feeling the heartbeat of the living plant thrumming faintly beneath his palm. And then, after a long, steady climb, the clouds parted like curtains, and Jack found himself standing at the edge of another land. It was a vast realm above the world, green and golden beneath a sun that seemed brighter here. Meadows rolled wide, dotted with wildflowers that glimmered like jewels. Streams wound lazily through the hills, their waters shimmering like melted silver. The sky overhead was endless, brushed with pale ribbons of cloud. But what drew his breath away were the shapes that moved slowly across the fields. They were giants, tall as towers, yet not frightening in the least. Their steps were deliberate, their motions unhurried, as though each carried the weight of centuries and moved in harmony with the earth itself. One giant knelt beside a brook, scooping water into a stone bowl and watching it spill back with a child's quiet wonder. Another sat beneath a great oak, weaving strands of grass into long cords that glimmered faintly in the sun. Their garments were simple, spun from fabrics that shimmered like woven moonlight, and their hair flowed long and unbound, stirred only by the wind. Jack stepped softly into the meadow, his heart steady. Though their size was immense, there was no threat in their presence, only calm, a slowness that seemed to quiet even his own thoughts. One of the giants turned toward him then, her face vast yet gentle, her eyes like clear pools of water. She lowered herself to the ground, resting her hands upon her knees, and when she spoke, her voice was a low hum, like the sound of wind through cavern walls. "Little one," she said softly, "you have climbed far." Jack bowed his head, speaking with respect. "I did not mean to disturb you. I only wished to see what lay beyond the clouds." The giantess smiled, a slow, warm curve of lips. "Curiosity is no trespass. It is the way of the young to seek. You may walk here without fear." Encouraged, Jack stepped closer. He asked about their life above the clouds, about the meadows and streams that seemed untouched by time. The giants answered him gently, each word measured like the toll of a great bell. "We keep the balance," another giant explained, his voice rumbling like distant thunder, yet steady and calm. "Our task is not to rule, but to tend. The rivers, the hills, the winds. They speak to us, and we listen." Jack listened too, drawn into their rhythm. Time seemed to stretch in their company. He sat upon a stone while one giant plucked fruit from a tree and offered it to him. It was sweeter than any he had tasted before, and with each bite, he felt warmth spread through him, as though he were part of this land itself. As the day passed, Jack found himself speaking less and listening more. The giants did not hurry, and so neither did he. They spoke of patience, of how the seasons turned in cycles, of how the stars wheeled slowly overhead. Their words were not commands but reminders, like lullabies sung by the earth to its children. When the sun began to lower, painting the sky in amber light, Jack knew he must return. Yet the thought carried no sadness, only a quiet gratitude for what he had seen. He bowed deeply to the gentle beings. "Thank you," he said softly. "I will remember your kindness." The giantess lowered her hand, palm open, and with the care of one cradling a bird, she lifted Jack high and set him near the beanstalk's crown once more. Her eyes lingered on him, calm and clear. "Carry peace with you," she said, "and share it where you walk." Jack nodded, his heart steady as he began the descent. The leaves rustled softly, the stalk swaying with evening breeze. Step by step, he climbed down, the air warming as he returned to his own world. By the time his feet touched the meadow below, twilight had begun to settle. The village glowed faintly in the distance, lanterns flickering to life one by one. Jack walked slowly along the path, each step echoing with the giant's rhythm. He felt taller somehow, though not in body, taller in spirit, stretched by the stillness he had touched. The villagers greeted him warmly, their smiles soft in the lantern light. Children clutched their mother's skirts, peering curiously at him, as though sensing he had glimpsed something wondrous. Jack only smiled, his words gentle. "It is a good evening," he said, and indeed it was. That night, after supper, Jack sat by the hearth, the flames painting gold across the stone walls. He laid his hands upon his knees, breathing slowly, remembering the giant's calm. Outside, the wind whispered through the thatch, and above, the stars stretched bright across the heavens. As he closed his eyes, he thought of their words, about listening, about patience, about peace. The crackle of fire and the hush of night wrapped around him like a blanket, and soon he drifted into sleep, safe and still, as though the giants themselves were watching over him. Chapter 5: The Castle in the Clouds. The following morning, Jack awoke to the gentle touch of dawn spilling across the meadows. The world above the clouds glowed with a hush of gold, as though the sun itself moved more slowly in this high land. The air was cool and sweet, filled with the fragrance of grass damp with dew and the faint murmur of streams winding lazily through the hills. He stretched, feeling his body light, his mind unburdened. Rising to his feet, he began walking along a path that curved gently upward, leading toward the far horizon. Birds circled in the wide skies overhead, their wings gleaming silver in the morning light. Their calls were soft, not sharp, more like the notes of a flute carried on the wind. Step by step, Jack moved deeper into the giant's world. The land felt endless, yet never lonely. Each hill seemed to bow toward the next, and every tree leaned with a welcoming grace. Time here moved differently, less like a rushing river, more like a quiet brook, winding gently where it pleased. As he crested a rise, Jack caught his first sight of the great castle. It stood upon a plateau, rising from the clouds like a vision half-dreamed. Its walls were pale stone, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. Vines of ivy curled up its sides, their leaves swaying gently. The towers reached toward the heavens, not with pride, but with calm assurance, as though they had always belonged there. Jack paused, letting the sight fill him. The castle did not loom. It invited. Its gates stood open, carved with flowing patterns of leaves and stars. The sunlight caught upon its windows, scattering flecks of gold across the courtyard below. With quiet steps, he approached. The air grew cooler in the shadow of the high walls, carrying with it the faint fragrance of herbs, lavender and thyme planted in the gardens that lined the outer walkways. Bees hummed softly from flower to flower, and the sound was so steady, so gentle, that Jack felt it echo within him like a heartbeat. Crossing the threshold, he entered the courtyard. It was vast, yet peaceful, paved with smooth stones, lined with fountains that poured water in slow, steady streams. Giants moved here as well, their figures graceful in their unhurried tasks. One swept the courtyard with a broom carved from whole branches. Another tended the gardens, their immense hands as gentle as any gardener's could be. Jack moved quietly, not wishing to disturb them, yet none regarded him with suspicion. Their eyes, when they met his, were calm, acknowledging him as one might acknowledge a sparrow alighting in a tree. At the heart of the courtyard stood the great hall. Its doors were of oak, carved with spirals that seemed to move as the light shifted across them. When Jack pressed his hand to the wood, it was warm, as though it held the memory of the sun. Slowly, carefully, he pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The hall glowed with a light that was not harsh but soft, streaming through high windows of colored glass. The glass itself told stories, patterns of rivers, forests, stars, and skies, all flowing together like the memory of the world. When sunlight touched them, the images shifted, spilling blue and green, gold and crimson across the stone floor. The hall was vast, yet it did not overwhelm him. The ceiling arched high above, its beams carved with shapes of leaves and constellations. Along the walls stood tall candles, their flames steady, their wax dripping slowly down silver stands. The air smelled faintly of honey and resin, a fragrance that seemed to soothe as he breathed it in. A giant moved within the hall, their steps measured, their robes flowing like water. They noticed Jack but did not speak, only nodded once, a gesture of welcome. Their presence was not commanding, but reassuring, like the steady glow of the moon that watches silently over the night. At the center of the hall lay a great hearth, its fire crackling softly. The flames were not wild but calm, rising in golden tongues that warmed the vast chamber. Around the hearth were cushions and woven mats, and though they were made for giants, even Jack found space among them. He sat there quietly, listening to the fire's slow song. Time stretched, the warmth seeped into his limbs, the light softened against his skin, and Jack felt himself drift in thought. He imagined the centuries that had passed within these walls, the countless nights when the fire had burned, the gentle conversations that had risen and faded like smoke. After some time, a giant approached and placed before him a bowl carved of stone. Within it was bread warm and fragrant, and fruit that glowed faintly as though kissed by the sun itself. Jack ate slowly, savoring each bite. The bread was soft, the fruit sweet, filling him with quiet strength. "Rest here," the giant said, their voice low, carrying like a drumbeat softened by distance. "This place is for all who seek peace." Jack bowed his head in gratitude, and the giant moved away, leaving him once more in silence. He lingered until the sun tilted westward, pouring amber light across the floor of the hall. The colors of the stained glass deepened, shifting into shades of rose and violet. The fire burned lower, its flames curling lazily. The hush of the place seemed to grow heavier, as though evening itself had entered and taken a seat among the shadows. At last, Jack rose. He thanked the hall in a whisper, as though the stones themselves were listening, and stepped back into the courtyard. The air outside had cooled, brushed with twilight. Lanterns glowed along the walls, their flames steady as stars. He wandered slowly through the gardens, pausing to breathe in the fragrance of lavender, rosemary, and sage. The plants swayed in the breeze, brushing against one another with the sound of gentle whispers. Bees had gone to sleep, replaced by the faint flicker of fireflies. By the time Jack reached the outer gate, the sky was deepening. The towers of the castle glowed faintly in the fading light, their shadows stretching long across the meadow. The clouds at the horizon shimmered with threads of pink and gold, then slowly sank into indigo. Jack looked back once more at the castle. It did not vanish from sight, nor fade like a dream. It remained steady, a beacon of calm above the world, its towers rising like guardians against the endless sky. With steady steps, he walked back along the path toward the Beanstalk. His heart was full, not with excitement, but with quiet contentment. The castle would always remain in his memory, not as a place of marvel, but as a place of rest, a reminder that even in the highest reaches of the sky, peace could be found. That night, when he returned to his village, Jack sat by his hearth and closed his eyes. The flames there were smaller, the room humbler, but in their glow he felt the same warmth he had known in the castle hall. And as he drifted towards sleep, he carried with him the calm of stone walls, the soft light of stained glass, and the steady rhythm of a fire that had burned for ages. Chapter 6, Songs of the Sky. Evening arrived gently in the land above the clouds. It did not rush in or sweep across the sky all at once. Instead, it crept softly, as though wrapping every hill and meadow in folds of violet and silver. The sun drifted lower, its light stretching long and golden across the fields, until the first stars blinked awake, small but steady, against the wide expanse of heaven. Jack wandered from the garden paths of the castle into the open meadows beyond. The grasses swayed with the weight of dusk, their tips brushed by silver light. A breeze moved through them, steady and unhurried, carrying with it a fragrance of wildflowers and cool stone. Each breath Jack drew filled him with a peace so deep that he found himself walking more slowly, as though his very steps wished not to disturb the stillness. At the far edge of the meadow, a circle of giants had gathered. They sat upon smooth stones that had long ago been placed in a ring, like an ancient meeting place where voices could mingle with the sky. Their forms rose tall, but their postures were unthreatening, shoulders relaxed, heads bowed slightly as they prepared to share their song. Jack approached quietly. None looked at him with surprise or alarm. They seemed to know he would come, as if he were part of the evening itself. One of the giants, her hair braided with strands of silver thread that glowed faintly in twilight, lifted a hand in welcome, beckoning him to join the circle. He sat upon a stone smaller than theirs, yet perfectly sized for him. The air here seemed to hum with expectation, not sharp but soft, like the low vibration of a harp string touched by a gentle hand. The first star had risen fully overhead, and its light pooled upon the stones, as though blessing the gathering. Then the singing began. It started with one voice, low and deep, a sound that seemed to echo from within the earth itself. It rolled outward, steady as the tide, filling the meadow with its resonance. Soon, a second voice joined, softer but higher, weaving around the first like threads of silk through wool. Then another and another, until the circle of giants was bound by a harmony so rich and calm that Jack felt the sound within his bones. There were no words in the song, only tones, long, drawn notes that rose and fell with the rhythm of breath and heartbeats. It was as though the giants were singing the very essence of the sky. The weight of dusk, the hush of clouds drifting, the patience of stars waiting to appear. Jack closed his eyes. With them shut, he felt the music even more clearly. The lowest tones vibrated like the steady ground beneath his feet, while the higher tones lifted gently, like wings brushing against air. Together, they cradled him, holding him in balance, neither pulling him down nor lifting him too far away. The song slowed. Each note lingered, echoing long after the giants' voices moved on, like ripples spreading across a still pond. The meadow itself seemed to sing back, crickets matching the rhythm, the breeze carrying the tones farther than the ear could follow. Even the stars, Jack thought, seemed to twinkle in time, their faint light pulsing with the music. When the voices fell silent at last, the silence was not empty. It was full, saturated with the memory of the song, as though the air itself now carried the melody. No one spoke. The giants sat with their heads bowed, their great hands resting upon their knees, breathing slowly. Jack, too, kept his eyes closed, feeling his body grow heavy with calm. At length, the giant with the silver-braided hair spoke. Her voice was soft, yet it carried easily through the meadow. "These are the songs of the sky," she said. "They are older than us, older than stone, older even than the stars. We do not sing them to remember, but to remind the world that it still breathes, slowly and well." He returned to his small chamber within the castle and sat by the window. From there, he could still hear faint echoes of the giants' voices, or perhaps it was only the wind, singing low as it passed through the towers. Either way, it lulled him, easing him deeper into stillness. Jack lay upon his bed, pulling the blanket to his chest. His eyes drifted shut, yet the song remained, circling within him, soft and endless. It blended with the rhythm of his breath, the slow beat of his heart, the hush of the night beyond. And so he slept, wrapped not only in blankets, but in the song of the sky itself, a lullaby older than time, cradling him in the peace of the land above the clouds. Chapter 7. The Meadow of Stillness. The sun rose carefully, as though it, too, respected the quiet rhythm of the valley. Its light did not blaze or command, but unfurled softly, spilling golden threads across the horizon. The mist lifted, layer by layer, as if reluctant to let go of the meadow it had cradled through the night. In its retreat, it revealed blossoms, their petals jeweled with dew, each glistening droplet holding a piece of the sky within. Caliph walked slowly from the square, his steps carrying him past the edge of the cottages, past the brook that wound like a silver thread, and toward the wide meadow beyond. His cloak brushed against tall grass, and every blade seemed alive with shimmering light. The air was cool still, touched by the memory of night, but the warmth of day already lingered in promise. The meadow stretched vast and open, cradled by the gentle slope of hills on either side. Wildflowers painted it in strokes of soft violet, yellow, and white, swaying gently in the early breeze. Butterflies, warmed now by the first touch of sunlight, stirred from their stillness, their wings opening like delicate books filled with color. Caliph paused at the meadow's edge, taking in the view as one might savor a feast. His heart slowed, his breath deepened, and for a moment, he felt as though he were not standing apart from this expanse but woven into it, one thread among countless others. He walked further in, each step releasing faint fragrances. The sweetness of clover, the sharp freshness of mint, the earthy undertones of soil damp with dew. Bees moved lazily from flower to flower, their humming a steady undertone to the morning's symphony. Above, a lark spiraled upward, its song rising in jubilant clarity, unbroken, endless, as though it could carry the entire meadow upon its voice. Caliph found a small rise at the meadow's center, a gentle hill where the grasses grew long and the view stretched in every direction. He seated himself upon the earth, his cloak pooling softly around him, and tilted his head back to watch the sky. The blue above was pale at first, washed clean by the retreating night, but it deepened slowly as the sun climbed higher. A few clouds drifted across it, thin, soft as wool, shaped by winds that moved too high to be felt below. The sight calmed him further, for there was no haste in their passing. They drifted simply and without purpose, as though the act of moving was reason enough. He lay back then, stretching upon the grass, feeling the blades cradle him as though the meadow itself were a vast bed laid out for those who chose to rest. His fingers brushed the earth, cool and steady, grounding him in its timelessness. Above, the lark sang still, joined now by sparrows and finches, their notes weaving together into a tapestry of sound so seamless it seemed as though the air itself had been born singing. Caliph let his thoughts move as gently as the clouds. He thought of Greendale, the bakery, the inn, the quiet flow of life. He thought of Isolde's warm loaves, Merrick's patient songs, Serena's wisdom carried in the folds of her shawl. He thought of Leora, her flowers placed quietly upon windowsills, their fragrance lingering even in absence. Each face, each voice felt close, as though the meadow carried them within its grasses, reminding him that peace did not end at the village's edge but stretched outward, carried by wind and soil and sky. Time seemed to soften in the meadow. The sun rose higher, warming his face, gilding each dew droplet until they vanished into air. Shadows shortened, their edges crisp but not harsh. The brook's murmur reached faintly even here, a reminder that water, too, carried its song through the valley. Caliph closed his eyes, allowing sound and scent to replace sight. He felt the wind move over him like a hand smoothing cloth, shifting his hair gently, tugging at the edges of his cloak. He heard the bees, steady and sure, their rhythm as ancient as the meadow itself. He smelled the blossoms, each fragrance distinct yet blending into a whole that was impossible to separate: sweetness, sharpness, warmth, earth. For a long time he did not move. He let himself drift, his breath falling into the same slow rhythm as the world around him. Thoughts dissolved. What remained was only sensation, only the steady presence of life lived without demand. At last, when the sun had climbed enough to cast the meadow in full gold, Caliph sat again, his body refreshed, his spirit quieted. He looked across the wide expanse, watching how the grasses leaned with the wind, how the butterflies rose and dipped as though pulled by unseen strings, how the flowers turned their faces toward the light with perfect trust. He spoke softly then, though no one was near to hear. "May all mornings arrive so gently." His words dissolved into the air, carried outward until they belonged not to him but to the meadow itself. Perhaps the nymphs heard them, carried them into the folds of their midnight songs, tucking them away as part of the valley's eternal harmony. When Caliph finally rose, brushing the grasses from his cloak, he did not feel that he left the meadow behind. He carried it with him, within the steady rhythm of his steps, within the quiet certainty of his breath. The meadow of stillness had folded itself into his heart, and he knew it would remain there, ready to be recalled whenever the world seemed too loud, whenever silence was needed again. And so he walked back slowly toward Greendale, his shadow soft beside him, the morning light warm upon his face. Behind him, the meadow swayed, endless and patient, a sea of blossoms moving only with the gentlest of winds. Chapter 8: The Whispering Library. Evening draped itself across the Sky Kingdom like a shawl of velvet. The last gold of the sun had faded into tender hues of lavender and silver, and stars were beginning to bloom in the heavens, one by one, as though they were carefully placed there by invisible hands. A soft wind moved through the castle corridors, carrying the sense of parchment and polished wood, hinting of places where stories lingered longer than time itself. Jack, guided by gentle curiosity, followed that sent deeper into the castle than he had ever gone before. His steps were slow, his hand grazing the cool stone of the walls, and the silence around him felt alive, like a friend breathing beside him. The corridor grew narrower until it opened into a wide arched doorway, carved with patterns of vines, moons, and flowing water. Above it, in letters so delicate they seemed almost like light, was inscribed, "The Library of Whispers." Jack paused at the threshold. The air was hushed, not in warning but in welcome. He stepped forward, and at once, a hush deeper than silence embraced him. The chamber beyond opened vast and endless, its ceilings so high they disappeared into the shadows, its shelves stretching outward like a forest of wood and parchment. The shelves themselves seemed alive, glowing faintly in the starlight streaming through tall windows. Rows upon rows of books lined the walls, books bound in leather, in silk, in wood, their spines painted in muted tones of green, gold, and deep ocean blue. Yet what struck Jack most was the sound. A murmur, as though countless voices spoke all at once in the gentlest of whispers. It was not noise but music, flowing and ebbing like the tide. The books were whispering. Curiosity warmed him, though it was never hurried. He walked slowly among the shelves, his fingers brushing lightly against the spines. As he touched them, some seemed to stir, their voices swelling for a moment before softening again. It felt as though each book carried not just words, but breaths, dreams, and gentle remembrances of times long past. A soft light moved ahead of him. Jack followed, finding that the glow came not from candles, but from lanterns suspended in the air like floating fireflies. Each glowed with a steady, golden flame, swaying as though stirred by an unseen breeze. They lit the path, leading him deeper into the library. At last, he came to a wide table of polished oak, upon which lay several books already opened. The pages shimmered faintly, words glowing as though written with threads of moonlight. Jack leaned closer. The whispering grew clearer. One book told of rivers that remembered every creature who drank from their waters. Another spoke of forests where trees sang lullabies to wandering children. Another still whispered the story of a village by the sea, where lanterns were released into the waves each night, carrying wishes across the horizon. Jack lingered over these pages, letting the stories drift into him not as commands but as calm suggestions. Each tale seemed to enter his thoughts like warm tea spreading through his chest, steadying his heartbeat, loosening the knots of the day. He realized that the library was not a place for study, but for rest, for letting one's mind be gently carried by the streams of story. As he turned a page, a soft voice spoke, not from behind him, but from the very air. "You are welcome here, wanderer of earth," it said, gentle as rain upon a roof. Jack did not startle. The library's peace held him too firmly for fear to take root. Instead, he looked around with quiet wonder. "Who speaks?" he asked softly. "The voices of stories," the air replied, though it sounded like a sigh of parchment. "We are the memories of the world, gathered in stillness. We do not shout, we do not command, we only whisper, so those who listen may find what their hearts need." Jack bowed his head. "Then I shall listen." When he reached the archway once more, the whispers faded behind him, leaving him in the gentle quiet of the corridor. The night outside the windows was deep and calm, stars steady against the velvet sky. Jack carried no book, no scroll, yet he felt as though he held the entire library within his heart. He returned to his chamber, where the lantern still glowed softly and the cloak still hung like moonlight over his chair. As he lay upon his bed, the whispers seemed to follow him, drifting like a breeze through his thoughts. And as sleep claimed him, Jack dreamed not of battles or giants, but of pages turning, of rivers murmuring, of forests singing lullabies. Stories that held him gently, as though the whole world had become a cradle of rest. Chapter 9, Beneath the Moonlit Sky. The night spread across the kingdom like a silken veil, soft and endless. Stars glimmered high above, countless and steady, as though they had always been there, waiting for eyes to lift and find them. The moon hung full and glowing, a lantern in the heavens, its light spilling silver across the fields and valleys below. Jack rose quietly from his chamber. Sleep tugged at him gently, yet there was a pull in the cool air, a whisper that invited him to walk beneath the night. Wrapping his cloak around his shoulders, he opened the door and stepped into the moonlight. The castle was hushed. Windows glowed faintly with candles left to burn low, their flames trembling softly behind shutters. A few guards walked the outer walls, but even their steps were unhurried, their spears glinting faintly with reflected moonlight. The kingdom was safe, cradled in the embrace of the night. Jack walked slowly down the stone path, his boots making little sound. Beyond the castle gates, the land opened wide. Meadows stretched in gentle waves, their grasses tipped with silver dew that caught the moonlight and shimmered as though the stars had fallen to earth. The air was cool, fragrant with lavender and thyme, stirred by a breeze that brushed his face with feather-like softness. Everywhere he looked, the world seemed hushed, not empty but deeply alive. Owls glided silently across the fields, their wings wide and white in the dark. Crickets sang their gentle chorus from the hedgerows, their rhythm steady, like a heartbeat beneath the night. In the distance, a brook whispered, its waters glowing faintly as they caught the moonlight, winding like a silver ribbon through the fields. Jack followed the sound. His steps carried him into the meadow where fireflies danced, rising and falling with their tiny lamps of gold. They seemed to echo the stars above, flickering in a language both playful and eternal. Jack paused to watch them, his heart softening, his breath deepening as if he were already halfway to a dream. At last, he reached the brook. Its banks were low and soft, lined with moss and stones smoothed by centuries of flowing water. Jack knelt and dipped his hand into the stream. The water was cool and clean, sliding across his fingers like silk. For a moment, he let his hand rest there, listening to the sound of the water moving endlessly onward. It reminded him of the library's whispers, gentle, unbroken, eternal. He sat upon the grass, leaning back on his elbows, gazing up at the moon. The sky was vast, yet it felt near, as though the stars bent close to listen. The longer he watched, the calmer he grew, until his heartbeat seemed to match the rhythm of the night itself. In that quiet, he thought of the stories he had read, of the voices that had whispered in the library. He realized the night sky was a story of its own. Each star was a word, each constellation a phrase. Together they formed an endless book, one written not in parchment but in light. And here, beneath the moonlit sky, Jack felt as though he were both reader and character, someone meant not to hurry, but to rest within the pages. A soft sound stirred nearby, the bleat of a lamb. Jack turned his head and saw a small flock resting at the meadow's edge. Their wool glowed faintly in the silver light, and they lay in clusters, close and warm, their breaths slow and even. A shepherd sat nearby, his staff across his knees, his head bowed in quiet watch. He lifted his gaze when he noticed Jack, and with a small nod of recognition, returned to his gentle vigil. Jack smiled faintly. No words were needed. The piece of the meadow was complete, shared by all without question. Time passed as slowly as the moon's climb. Shadows shifted, stretching long across the grass. The brook's song continued, steady and sure. Jack's eyes grew heavy, yet he did not fight it. Instead, he let the weight of the night press softly against him, inviting him to sink deeper into calm. When at last he stood, he walked slowly back across the meadow, the fireflies rising and falling like lanterns to light his way. The breeze stirred again, carrying with it the sense of herbs, of fresh water, of earth resting beneath the stars. Each breath filled him with stillness, each step drawing him closer to home. The castle rose in the distance, its towers glowing faintly in the moonlight. Jack paused once to look back at the meadow, at the brook winding like silver, at the stars above holding steady. He bowed his head in gratitude for the night, for the peace, for the gentle embrace of the world. When he entered the castle once more, all was as he had left it. The guards calm, the windows glowing faintly, the halls hushed. He returned to his chamber, closing the door with quiet care. The bed waited, soft and warm, its blanket carrying the faint scent of lavender. Jack removed his cloak, laying it across the chair. He sat for a moment, gazing through the window at the moon. Its glow filled the room with silver light, gentle and protective. He felt as though it watched over him, as it watched over the fields and the brook, the shepherd and the lambs, the fireflies and the owls. At last he lay down. The mattress welcomed him, the pillow cradled his head. He drew the blanket up, sighing softly as warmth wrapped around him. The sounds of the night drifted in, the whisper of the breeze, the song of crickets, the steady murmur of the brook. Together they wove a lullaby, not hurried, not loud, but endless in its calm. His eyes closed, his breath deepened. The world outside continued in its soft rhythm, carrying him gently toward sleep. Chapter 10: The Kingdom Dreams. Night settled over the kingdom not with haste, but with the unhurried grace of a candle being slowly dimmed. One by one, the golden hues of twilight surrendered to the deeper shades of indigo. The stars above stretched awake in their endless tapestry, glimmering like quiet watchfires kindled in the heavens. The great castle, standing upon its hill, glowed gently in their light, its towers touched with silver, its windows aglow with the last of the evening candles. The kingdom, so vast and green in daylight, now softened into a lullaby of shadows. Fields lay still beneath their veil of dew, orchards slumbered beneath drifting clouds, and cottages with thatched roofs shone with faint amber glows from their hearths. No clamor filled the night, no worry disturbed the air. Only the tender sound of leaves brushing in the wind, and the faint chorus of crickets playing their eternal song. Jack walked slowly through the cobbled path that wound up to the castle gates. His steps were unhurried, each one matching the rhythm of the calm night. The echoes of his boots were soft, muffled by moss and grass that had grown between the stones. At the edges of the path, wildflowers nodded under the moonlight, their petals folded as though they too had surrendered to slumber. The guards at the gate gave him a nod, their armor glinting faintly in the starlight. They did not speak. Words felt unnecessary beneath the weight of such a peaceful sky. Instead, they stood like gentle sentinels, guardians not against danger, but against any interruption of the night's serenity. Inside, the castle breathed a similar calm. Tapestries upon the walls stirred lightly in the draft from the high windows, their woven threads catching the glow of lanterns. The scent of beeswax from melted candles lingered in the halls, mingling with the faint fragrance of herbs hung to dry along the kitchens below. Footsteps echoed softly in the corridors, though most of the castle's inhabitants had already drifted into sleep. Jack moved through the hall with ease, his hand grazing the cool stone wall as he passed. His journey with the giants had ended some time ago, yet the memory of it now seemed softened by distance, like a dream remembered upon waking. What lingered most was not the clash of danger or the echo of fear, but the moment of return. The sight of the kingdom safe, its people smiling, its meadows untouched. That memory was a balm, and tonight it rested in him like a lullaby. He stepped into the great hall where a single fire still glowed upon the hearth. The flames were low, amber rather than gold, their shadows stretching long upon the polished floor. He sat upon the bench nearest the warmth, his hands extended slightly toward the flames, not for need but for comfort. The crackle of wood was steady, soothing, a rhythm that blended with the castle's quiet heartbeat. Beyond the windows, the moon had risen high. Its silver washed across the hills, across the river that wound like a ribbon through the valley, and across the rooftops of the sleeping village below. Jack could see faint pinpricks of light where villagers had left candles burning in their windows. A mother's care, a father's watchfulness, the tender safety of a lamp glowing against the dark. In those cottages, life itself was resting. Farmers, weary from their day, lay under woolen blankets, their dreams as gentle as the fields they tended. Children clutched their wooden toys close, their faces serene as they wandered through dreamscapes only their imaginations could paint. In the stables, horses shifted softly, their breath rising in clouds of silver. Chickens roost, foxes curled in dens, owls lifted wings into the starlit sky, calling softly as they glided through the hush. Jack thought of the kingdom as one vast body, breathing slowly in unison. Every cottage a heartbeat, every lantern a flicker of spirit, every dream a note in the great song of night. And the giants, once feared and fabled, now felt distant, like shadows that had lifted to let the kingdom shine brighter in its peace. Rising from the bench, Jack climbed the spiral stair to the castle's highest balcony. The stone steps were cool beneath his hands, and each turn of the staircase opened to another small window, where moonlight spilled in like silver paint upon the wall. At the top, he stepped out into the night air, where the whole valley spread before him like a painting drawn by the stars. The breeze touched his face gently, carrying the perfume of lavender from the gardens below. He closed his eyes, letting it fill him, letting the sounds of the night deepen around him. The brook trickling far off, the leaves shifting, the faint call of a nightingale. It was a song without urgency, without end, a song that belonged only to peace. He leaned upon the balcony rail and looked upward. The stars, countless and steady, seemed to gaze back at him. Their light was not sharp, but soft, like lanterns placed in the sky to keep watch through the dark hours. In their glow, Jack felt no burden, no weight of heroism, only the quiet joy of being small within something vast and endless. As the hours deepened, the kingdom itself seemed to slip into dreams. The last candles dimmed in the village. The fountain in the square whispered softly, its trickle fading beneath the hush of the wind. In the castle, doors closed gently, footsteps stilled, voices hushed into silence. All that remained was the steady rhythm of breath, of rest, of sleep embraced by night. Jack returned to his chamber at last. The door opened with a soft creak, the room within already aglow with a faint fire upon the hearth. He set aside his cloak, folded with care upon the chair, and placed his boots near the wall. The bed before him was simple but welcoming, dressed in linen sheets that carried the faint fragrance of lavender. The pillow promised softness, the blanket warmth. He moved with unhurried motions, savoring each small act as though it were a ritual. Washing his hands in the basin, feeling the cool water against his skin. Running his fingers across the carved wood of the bed frame, smooth with age. Watching the fire's gentle dance, its glow painting the ceiling with amber waves. Finally, he lay down, drawing the blanket to his chin. The fabric held the day's warmth, and the bed cradled him like a gentle embrace. He turned toward the window, where the moon shone steady above the valley, and let his eyes linger upon it. His breathing slowed. His eyelids grew heavy. The sounds of the night, the whisper of the wind, the call of the nightingale, the hush of the brook, wove together into one endless lullaby. And as Jack drifted toward sleep, the kingdom itself seemed to breathe with him. Castle and village, meadow and river, forest and hill, all resting together beneath the stars. No fear, no danger, no haste, only the certainty of peace and the gentle promise of dawn yet to come. Thus the kingdom dreamed, wrapped in the night's embrace, and in its dreaming found a stillness deeper than silence, a calm brighter than light.